My grandmother left me her old house. In the attic crawlspace, there's a livable nook and a quiet man who says he has a lifetime right to stay. My siblings want a quick sale. The landlord, my late grandma's lawyer friend, calls it sentimental clutter, and a handwritten agreement suggests the tenant might have been her caregiver. Then I found a sealed envelope hidden behind a loose stair tread. I'm female 29. My grandmother, Evelyn, passed away 3 months ago. She owned a small, ivy-gnawed, 2-story house with slanted eaves and a garden that's simultaneously a jungle and a chapel. I spent summers there making dandelion salad, and learning to knit, worse than dandelion salad. The house smells like cardamom, mothballs, and the exact cushion where family secrets go to nap. Her will named me the sole heir of the house. Everyone expected the split to be even. Me, my older brother Liam, male 33, and younger sister Nora, female 26. But the lawyer, a polite man named Mr. Hill, read the clause. To my granddaughter, for reasons we both understand. I didn't understand, actually. I loved Grandma, but Nora lived closer, and Liam has a family. If anyone should have gotten a house, it should have been one of them, right? And after the funeral, at the gathering with sandwiches that wear black, Liam put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "Congrats?" Then, immediately, "What's your plan?" I mumbled something about keeping it for a year, maybe renting, maybe painting the kitchen red, because Grandma always said only cowards pick beige. Nora, who has never picked beige in her life, said, "You'll keep it neutral so we can sell." 2 days later, I drove out with a dust mask, gloves, and the kind of playlist that thinks elbow grease is a love language. The house greeted me with a stubborn front door. 3 deadbolts, Grandma was dramatic, and that familiar creak at the bottom stair that once made me think the house had a heartbeat. And I turned on the lights. Half worked. I opened windows. Half stuck. I started a list. Handyman. Electrician. Therapist. For me, not the house. In the kitchen, I found Grandma's recipe box labeled, in her spiky script, things that do not go in Jell-O. I made tea on a stove that sighed. And around noon, I took the narrow stairs to the attic. It's more crawl space than room, with a pitched ceiling and a dormer window that frames a slice of sky like it's old cake. I had the flashlight in my teeth and dust in my throat when I saw it. A door inside the attic, barely higher than my waist, disguised with beadboard and painted the same dull cream as everything else that used to be alive in 1978. And I tugged the tiny brass handle. It stuck. I wedged a putty knife in the seam and worked the paint like a zipper. The door opened with a sigh. Everything in this house sighs, and revealed a short tunnel, then a notch of space. Insulation on 3 sides, but the floor covered with rugs. A mattress pushed against the far wall, a lamp wired to an extension cord, a stack of books, and a metal trunk. It smelled faintly of cedar, and the kind of soap that tries to be unscented and fails. And then someone cleared his throat. And I flinched so hard I stabbed the ceiling with the flashlight. It stuttered light over a man sitting cross-legged on the mattress, palms up like I'd interrupted a meditation. He was maybe late 60s, thin, clean-shaven, wearing corduroys with a darned knee and a navy sweater mended at the elbow with careful stitches. He looked like someone's favorite librarian. He blinked at me, with the slow calm of a person who knows exactly where he is. I said the first smart thing that came to my mind. "Hello?" "Hello," he said, too calmly, like I was the intruder. His voice was gentle and threaded with something not from here. Irish? Welsh? The kind of accent that takes out vowels for T. "What are you doing in my grandmother's attic?" I asked, which is a sentence you think you'll never say out loud.
He folded his hands.
"I'm Paul, and this is not just your grandmother's attic. That's not how houses work."
He nodded at the trunk.
"There's a paper that will explain in the trunk, if you'll let me." I held out a hand like a traffic cop for mice. "Stay. I'll look."
The trunk wasn't locked.
It was fastened. Inside were 2 wool blankets, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine, and a yellowed folder. On the tab, Room. Inside, a handwritten agreement, witnessed and dated August 12, 1999, in my grandmother's careful printer's script N.I., Evelyn M. Grant to P. A lifelong right to use the garret room, attic alcove, at 14. Lane, so long as the use remains quiet and considerate, in exchange for assistance with household tasks and garden maintenance. The right shall not confer ownership, but shall be honored by my heirs, as this defendant has shown me loyalty and care. E.M.P. Witness L. Hill, and I reread the phrase, shall be honored by my heirs. The witness was Mr. Hill, the lawyer who'd read the will, and I looked at Paul. He gave me a small, apologetic smile. Your grandmother and I agreed, he said. I keep to myself. I fix what I can. I carry the groceries. When the snow drifts, I make a path. In spring, I kneel in the dirt and humiliate the dandelions. Why have I never seen you? He tilted his head. Because she asked me to be quiet, and because you were a child, and children tell stories, and I should have screamed or called the police or something that proves I watch TV. Instead, I sat on the edge of the crawlspace and let the light dust itself in midair. How long have you been here? He did the math with his eyes, on and off since 1999. More, after her knees rebelled. You were her caregiver. He shrugged. I was her friend who happened to be useful. Where did you come from? Why? I gestured at the nest. Blankets, books, a mug that said world's okayest gardener. He smiled at the mug. We were neighbors once. Bad roof, good rain. She needed someone to look at the wiring without charging her the moon. I needed a place to stop and read. He looked around the tiny room, like it was a cathedral. You can hear the rain on the real roof and the imaginary roof, and between them, quiet. And I stared at the paper again. Lifelong right, honored by my heirs. It looked real in the way that makes your stomach roll. Handwritten, witnessed, signed by a lawyer who still answers emails. It wasn't notarized, which my brother's voice in my head wanted to argue about, but it existed. I'm not here to evict anyone, I said, and felt how true that was, even as my amygdala filed an appeal. I just didn't know. And Paul nodded, then glanced at the crawlspace door. Could we close that? Draft. And I closed it. My heart didn't climb down for a long time. We made tea. We sat in the kitchen like the ending of a story that forgot to start. He told me my grandmother used to label jam jars raspberry. Summer I liked the neighbor's haircut. He told me she used to play the same song on the piano every Tuesday and curse at her fingers when they skipped. He told me when she fell last winter, she refused to call the doctor until he baked bread, which took 4 hours because yeast is petty. He told me she was stubborn and funny and fierce in exactly the edges of her that made other people afraid. "Now I'm not squatting," he said finally, quiet. "I suppose I'm hiding." She asked me to be hidden. And I thought of family stories, the summer boarder who never left, the apartment over the garage that never existed, the imaginary friend I had at 8 who wore a nameless sweater, who knew about the knots in Grandma's garden twine. Memory is a liar. It was probably Paul, and I asked why the agreement wasn't in the will. He said she considered it hers, and wills are for everyone else. I slept at the house that night on the living room couch, heart doing push-ups, mind doing algebra. At 2 in the morning, I woke to footsteps on the stairs, soft and cautious. I sat up, ready to panic, then heard humming, a tune I knew, the Tuesday song. It came from the attic, then drifted down, and I realized it wasn't footsteps, just the house settling, like a person in bed adjusting their pillow. And in the morning, I texted Liam and Nora, found something in the attic. Need to talk. Liam replied with 3 exploding head emojis and, sell it as is. Nora replied, boundaries, don't get sentimental. I emailed, Mr. Hill, lawyer. Subject line, attic occupant plus handwritten agreement. Witnessed by you? He called within 10 minutes. Nah, he said after I read him the clause. Yes, that agreement. He cleared his throat. I witnessed it. It is not a lease, but it's not nothing. What is it? It's a license. Informal, yes. A promise. If contested by parties eager to sell, I can say what I saw. Evelyn was of sound mind. She intended to give Mr. Paul the right to remain until his death, or he chooses to leave. That's a lot. It is, he agreed. She asked me not to formalize it in the will because wills are public. She feared certain relatives would. He searched for a kind word and found none. Overreact. Translation. Liam and Nora would explode like a poorly refrigerated pudding. Are my siblings going to sue me? He paused. I could hear him choosing a lane. They might threaten. But the house is yours. The agreement doesn't stop you from owning it. It complicates how you use it. Selling with an occupant who has a lifetime license is possible but hard. Many buyers won't like it. Some will, if priced accordingly, and morally. I asked, because I'm the granddaughter who once rescued a spider from a sink with a Polaroid of it, like it needed ID and morally. He said, your grandmother wanted Paul to have peace. I don't know what he gave her in exchange, besides company and a man who knows his way around a breaker box. But she underlined, honored by my heirs. She rarely underlined, and I thanked him. I sat with my tea, now cold, looked at the garden that had made dandelions a state of mind, and tried to imagine telling Liam that a mysterious attic man would slow down his timeline. At noon, Nora arrived. She has hair like a well-funded skincare brand and opinions like a well-funded debate team. She hugged me because she loves me, and she would also reboot my heart if it helped us both make a deadline. What's the attic thing? She said, already walking toward the stairs. And I took a breath. Please don't scream. We found Paul in the kitchen, drinking tea, reading a manual about 1970s circuit panels like it was a romance novel. He stood and smiled. You must be Nora. She froze like I'd introduced a new species. I'm Paul. I live quietly, in the garret. She looked at me, then at him, then at the folder I'd left on the table with the word room on it like a game show reveal. She read the agreement. Twice. She pinched the bridge of her nose the way our mother did when we broke something we weren't supposed to know was fragile. This isn't legal, she said. It might not be enforceable in a typical way, I said, but the lawyer witnessed it. He called it a license. Grandma wanted this. Nora pursed her lips. Liam is going to weaponize the word lifetime. And as if summoned by the sound of future arguments, Liam pulled into the driveway in his sensible sedan and performed 3 sighs before stepping into the house. He saw Paul and put on his bank face. Liam works in finance. His face has a uniform. And what's this? He asked, and I handed him the paper. He read like it owed him money. No, he said to the heir. Absolutely not. We're selling. We have to split the proceeds ethically. It's not yours to sell, I said gently, hating how the words felt like a door closing. Grandma left it to me. Yes, to you. So we could make sensible decisions. That's not how bequests work. He gestured the attic like it could hear him. Who even is this man? And Paul, to his credit, didn't shrink. I'm Paul. I can fix your dryer. Liam blinked. What? He fixed Grandma's everything. I said. He carried groceries. He snow shoveled. He stayed. This says lifetime. Liam shook the paper as if the word might fall off. We can't sell with a lifetime person in the walls. That's a horror movie. Then we don't sell, I said, and felt something in my chest settle like a coin finding the bottom of a slot. We argued till the shadows in the living room looked like audience members. Nora played translator between my ethics and Liam's math. Paul washed the teacups and dried them with a towel he knew where to find because this was his home too. Finally, Liam said, I will speak to a real lawyer. I told him Mr. Hill is a real lawyer. He said, a different one. He left in a cloud of respectability. Nora stayed. We took inventory. Leaky gutter, cracked tile, ancient wiring, plants plotting a coup. Paul pointed out what he could fix and what needed someone with insurance. He showed us the garden ledger, Grandma's notebook with drawings of beds, dates of frost, names of every stray cat she fed, Mr. Parliament, Tree Nut, the Count. In the evening, Paul made soup, lentils, carrots, potatoes, a confidence in pepper that bordered on scandal. We ate at the wobbly table. It felt like home, the way home smells like soup you didn't have to cook. Nora looked at Paul in a new way, like a person, not a problem. Now for the part where the house pulled a magic trick. And after Nora left, I went up the main stairs to the landing with the family photos. Grandma in a dress that looked like a secret, my mother as a teenager, all cheekbones and bangs, me missing 2 teeth and the point of most games. One stair creaked differently, higher pitched, not the usual groan. I pressed my foot and felt give, like the steps swallowed a breath, and I crouched. The stair's nose, the rounded front edge, had a hairline crack. I ran my finger along the underside and felt a lip, a panel. I used my putty knife again, new hero of the story, and pried gently. The tread lifted like a lid, revealing a hollow. Inside was a sealed envelope, cream, tied with a red ribbon. On the front, my name, Formira, in Grandma's old-fashioned hand. My stomach did the twist my mind tried to name, and I brought it to the kitchen. Paul was there, washing the soup pot, humming the Tuesday song. I held up the envelope. He dried his hands and stepped back. "That's not mine to see," he said. I broke the seal. Inside, 3 sheets of paper, lined, written with a fountain pen that sometimes fell asleep on the downstrokes. At the top, "You will find this because you always listened to the house. Good." And I read, "Mira, if Mr. Hill is reading this over your shoulder, tell him to make tea, then leave. He knows enough. You are my bravery that learned to pay rent. I left you this house because I think you will let it be more than a thing with a price. You will have relatives who will count rooms like coins and call love sentiment. Let them. The garden does not explain herself to concrete." And about Paul. He saved my life when my knees gave up and the winter tried to push me down the stairs. He brought bread and a song. I told him he could have the garret for as long as he wanted, so long as he was quiet enough for me to hear the birds. He is. Please honor that. There is a second reason you will find when you look at the ledger, spring of 2001 and autumn of 2003. Ask him if you must, or let it be what it was. Kindness traded for kindness. If you keep the house, paint the kitchen red. If you sell it, I know, find someone who will not file down the wooden stair to make it modern. Some things should creak. And on the lowest pantry shelf behind the jars, there's something that belongs in your pocket. Use it on days when money speaks louder than memory. I love you. E.P.S. Dandelions are excellent if you lie to yourself first. Asterisk, and I read it twice. I cried the way a person cries when validation puts a warm hand on the doctrine of their life. Paul pretended to look for a towel, and I went to the pantry. On the lowest shelf, behind jars of things that were once certainly edible, and might now be collections of dust, I found a cigar tin with a paper band around it labeled "Rainy Day Nails." Inside were keys, old ones, 2 Saint medals, a faded photograph of Grandma and a man I didn't recognize on a porch that looked almost like ours, and at the bottom, a bank book, one of those pass books with stamped deposits, and a cashier's check for $12,000, dated 2009, payable to bearer. The passbook showed small deposits through the early 2000s, $20, $35, 1750 cents. Notes in the margin, P, gas, roof nails, when he wouldn't let me carry the flour. And I showed Paul the check. He shook his head. "I didn't know she did that," he said, voice thin. "She did it for you," I said. "Or for the house." "Same thing," he said, and I put the check back in the tin. I put the tin in my bag. I didn't tell Liam that part yet. I wanted to hold one thing that wasn't going to turn into someone's spreadsheet. That night, I slept in Grandma's room, under the quilt that looks like a logic puzzle, while Paul slept in the garret under a roof that spoke fluent rain. The house breathed. I dreamed of the garden ledger and woke with dirt under my fingernails I didn't remember earning. Tomorrow, Liam will bring a lawyer. Tomorrow, Nora will bring bullet points. Tomorrow, I will bring tea and the letter and the kind of boundary that sounds like a stair that creaks because it matters. The next morning, the house woke like an orchestra. kettle hiss, floorboard cello, window latch clarinet. I set out cups because people bring lawyers the way other folks bring pies. Liam arrived in a shirt that apologized for wrinkles and a tie that didn't. His lawyer, Ms. Crane, came with a briefcase and shoulder armor. Navy blazer, sharp empathy. Nora came with a notebook divided by color tabs. Legal, moral, money, unknowns. Paul came down the stairs with a plate of toast and a neutrality, usually reserved for diplomats and cats. NWE sat at the kitchen table that lists slightly to the left, like it has opinions. Ms. Crane opened politely with knives. Ms. Mira, thank you for having us. I'll be concise. Your grandmother's handwritten paper is heartfelt, but not a lease. It is not recorded. It does not create a real property interest. If anything, it's a license revocable at will. The house is an asset. Your siblings reasonably expect fairness. The fastest path is a sale. We can explore cash for keys for Mr. Paul, I said. For Paul, contingent on a move-out date. Paul dabbed a crumb from the corner of his mouth and placed the napkin down like a truce flag. With respect, ma'am, Evelyn did not intend for me to be bought like a chair. She underlined honor. N.M.'s Crane's gaze softened a millimeter. Intent is one thing. Enforceability is another. Enforceability, I repeated, rolling the word like a marble. What about promissory estoppel? She promised him a place. He stayed. He cared for her. He changed his life to keep that promise alive. N.M.'s. Crane tipped her head. You've been Googling. She has me, Nora said, tapping legal tab in her notebook. Also, Mr. Hill witnessed the paper. As if summoned, Mr. Hill arrived with a folder, apology smile, and a thermos. He shook Miss Crane's hand like two surgeons, politely sharing a scalpel. Miss Crane, we know each other. Of course we do, she said, which in lawyer means I know your moves. Hello again? Mr. Hill glanced at the table. Shall I? He sat. I can attest Evelyn's capacity and intent. She did not want a public will mention. She did want the license honored. It's informal, but not nothing. A court could find that revoking it would be unconscionable, given years of reliance. Or it could not, Miss Crane said, matching his tone. My client, she gestured to Liam, is open to a solution that does not drag the family through litigation and still secures value. Ain value, Paul repeated, like he was tasting a word he'd once known. She valued quiet. Quiet doesn't pay taxes, Liam muttered. Actually, I said gently, sliding the passbook from the cigar tin across the table. Not the check, not yet. It sometimes does. I pointed to margins. Gas, roof nails. Small money, steady help. This house held a quiet economy. Ms. Crane ganned, then looked up. This proves relationship. It doesn't prove a life estate. I'm not claiming a life estate, I said. I'm claiming a license with equitable weight, and I own the house. We are not evicting Paul. Liam exhaled, a tire losing air. So we just, what? Keep a stranger in the walls until he chooses to leave or dies, Nora said, not as a threat, but as a calendar. We can't make that sound pretty. We can make it sound human. Paul pushed his chair back, quietly. You can discuss me like a ledger line if it helps move the math. I'll make tea. He left the kitchen. A silence shaped like a person sat at the table. I took a breath that felt like an old hinge. There's more? Grandma left a letter. I read parts, careful. The honor line, the draft admonition, the paint, the kitchen red. Irrelevant, delicious. I skipped the last paragraph. The pantry tin note, the check, because we weren't at trust yet, and Ms. Crane tapped her pen. Here's a practical path. She numbered with her pen like a wand. 1. Memorialize the license in a written occupancy agreement. Non-transferable, no rent, duties clear, no assignment, terminable only for cause. 2. Record a memorandum to put future purchasers on notice. 3. Siblings consider a family settlement. a future interest. Percentage of net proceeds at sale when occupancy ends. Liam bristled. Why do we need to wait for our share? Why not sell now with a discount? Because buyers don't buy houses with humans in the attic like it's a plot twist, I said. And because I am not selling, not now. He looked at Ms. Crane. She gave him the small lawyerly shrug that says, I can try to pull a rabbit, but I did not bring a hat. You could file a partition action, she said, careful, if you co-owned. But you don't. The will is clear. The house is Mira's. Knit hung there. The sentence Grandma wrote, now a room we occupied. Nora broke the stalemate with a pencil click. Let's tour the house, she said. If we're going to argue about its life, we should at least look it in the eye. NWE climbed the stairs. Paul met us on the landing with a tray. Tea, honey. The Tuesday song hummed under his breath. Liam watched him duck into the garret door with a caution that looked like childhood meets haunted story. May I? Miss Crane asked, peering into the alcove. Paul nodded. She took in the mended sweater folded on a crate, the books, electrical manuals, a battered poetry collection, the joy of cooking with a broccoli bookmark. The lamp wired neatly to an outlet that looked safer than the kitchen's. It didn't look like a movie squatter's nest. It looked like a sailor's cabin on land. And back in the hall, a gust of nostalgia tried to bowl me down the stairs. I steadied myself with the photo wall. I held Grandma's teen smile with my palm like you can press warmth back into paper. Liam stared at our mother's picture. For a moment his jaw softened, the way it used to when she said his name at the top of a staircase. We moved to the garden. Paul walked like a docent. He pointed out the ledger beds. Here's where she tried carrots and grew gossip. Here the peonies that drank all the praise. Here where the sun pretends not to be late. He knelt to show Nora how the dandelions pulled free easier after rain. She rolled her eyes in a way that meant, thank you, shut up. And back in the kitchen, Miss Crane packed her briefcase. You have options, she said. This can be solved without making enemies of each other. I suggest a draft of the occupancy, MOU, and a memorandum. Gather receipts, define duties. Give your brother a timeline for review. And after they left, the house exhaled. Nora stayed behind, leaning on the counter. I didn't expect to like him, she said, meaning Paul. But he makes the house feel like Grandma's house, not a listing. That's because he was part of it, I said. She tapped her notebook. What did Grandma mean by spring 2001 and autumn 2003? She flipped the garden ledger. The spring 2001 page had a pressed pansy taped down and, in the margin, tiny initials I hadn't noticed. HM Bloodwork and Paul Match. The autumn 2003 page had a pressed leaf and the words Thanksgiving. Lungs okay. Piano on Tuesday again. NMY Throat did a small private thing. HM Helen, my mother, 2001. Bloodwork, 2003. Lungs, okay. She died in late 2004 after a remission that felt like summer sneaking into October. The transplant had bought us a year and a half of picnics indoors and laughing in grocery stores and teaching me to drive in a church parking lot. And I sat down like someone had unplugged my legs. Do you think? Nora started, then stopped. We looked toward the stairs. We both knew who to ask. And Paul came down with the empty tray. He paused when he saw our faces. You found it? He said softly. Not a question. Did you? I began, then swallowed. In 2001, were you a donor match? He placed the tray very carefully on the counter. I was a possible match, he said. Your mother's brother tried first and wasn't. I was the second test. It was a partial, not perfect. The doctors debated. Your mother chose to try. The transplant was spring 2001. In autumn 2003, there was a flare, pneumonia complications. She played piano again the week she felt her breath come back. Tuesday. I never forgot. I pressed my palm flat on the ledger like I could feel the pulse of that day. I didn't know, I said, hearing the child I was, suddenly in the kitchen again holding a glass of apple juice too hard. She didn't want you to carry it, Paul said. She wanted your childhood to be as unmedical as possible. Nora wiped her face with the back of her hand. Grandma's letter said kindness for kindness. This was more than kindness. It was luck, Paul said. Luck in cells and your mother's stubbornness. He half smiled. Stubbornness runs in the garden. Then I took the faded photo from the tin, the one with Grandma and the man on the porch that looked almost like ours. Who is he? And Paul took it like you take a moth, careful not to harm. Arthur, he said, my partner. He died in 1998. Heart. We boarded one summer here, in the guest room, when the roof at our place failed. Evelyn let us stay while we rebuilt. After he died, I couldn't look at the rooms we'd painted together. She said, then come paint mine, and she showed me the garret. He smiled at something far off. We ate lentil soup and dismantled a fuse box, and didn't speak of grief in nouns. That was the first kindness. The second was your mother. The house shifted around us like a person listening. A page in the ledger fluttered with no breeze. Nora closed the book with a gentle slap. Okay, she said, voice suddenly business with a heartbeat. Here's what we do. We formalize the license into an occupancy agreement with duties and safety rules. We record a simple memorandum, and I will get Liam a mock-up of a future proceeds agreement so he doesn't feel disinherited by time. You think he'll go for it? I asked. He'll want to grieve the spreadsheet, she said. But yes, I'll talk to him. Without Miss Crane. He hears fees when she speaks vocals. That night, after Nora left, Paul and I rewired the kitchen's one-eyed outlet. He narrated like a teacher who believes the class will become electricity. Black to brass, white to silver, green to ground. Electricity wants to return. Give it an honest path. I could use that on feelings, I said. He chuckled. Feelings are the stubborn path. But yes, we installed new smoke detectors, battery backups linked, a company alarm, and he insisted on a second fire extinguisher. By the stove, by the hall. He labeled the breaker panel with a label maker older than some dogs. If the house ever screams, he said, you want to know which button to push to make it quieter. And I slept in Grandma's bed again, as if love is a patina you can lean against. I fell asleep to the Tuesday song from the garret, played in the key of someone making sure the world still knows how to hum. And 2 days later, we met again, with Ms. Crane this time, because Liam wanted a record. Mr. Hill brought a draft occupancy agreement that read like a handshake taught to write. Paul has the garret, shared access to kitchen and bath, must be quiet 10 in the evening, 6 in the morning, no guests without consent, no assignment, terminable for cause, threats, damage, felony, otherwise lifetime, or until he chooses to leave. Duties: light maintenance, garden, snowpath, change smoke detector batteries, call electrician for more than he can safely do. No rent, in-kind care. We attach the 1999 letter as Exhibit A, the Mr. Hill witness statement as Exhibit B&Ms. Crane read with a pen that clicked when she disagreed. We need clarity on liability, she said. No climbing unsafe ladders, no roof without harness, nothing that increases premiums. Agreed, I said, preempting Paul's stubbornness. Safety first, medical privacy, Ms. Crane said, eyeing our faces. No references to past health events. That's not consideration. Keep it out. Agreed. Nora said quickly, looking at me. We negotiated like civilized mammals. At the end, Paul held the pen, hands steady. I accept on one condition, he said. Liam braced. Ms. Crane prepped to object. Paul smiled at me. You let me paint the kitchen red, and I laughed. Then I cried. Then we all laughed because crying in front of lawyers is apparently contagious. Ms. Crane even softened enough to say, choose a good primer. We signed. Mr. Hill notarized. Ms. Crane printed a memorandum of occupancy, 2 pages of legal blandness that say, effectively, there is a person upstairs. Do not pretend you didn't know. We agreed it would be recorded, for notice only. No private details. Liam did not love the future proceeds idea at first. Nora took him for a sibling walk in the garden where they used to sword fight with iris leaves. They came back with a compromise. When the occupancy ends, if I sell within 5 years, I will share 15% of net proceeds with each sibling, total 30%, capped at a number that doesn't make me faint, indexed to inflation because Liam cannot not index. If I keep the house, no payments owed, because a home is an expense disguised as a feeling. We shook hands. It felt like a season changing, the invisible click when a door latch lines up with a strike plate. After, Liam stood on the stairs and stared at the photo wall again. "Did Mom?" he started, then stopped, then tried again. "Paul, thank you for whatever you did. Or didn't, for being here." He held out his hand. Paul shook it. It was brief, and it was something. That night, we painted. The kitchen went red, the shade of pomegranates and arguments. Paul taped edges with the zeal of a monk. I rolled like a DJ, mixing optimism into corners. We left the last bit unpainted. A square around the light switch, to mark where the old color used to be. Nora took a photo and captioned it. "Bravery that learned to pay rent." She didn't tag anyone. Not everything wants an audience. When the paint dried, Paul brought out a small radio from the garret, one of those with a dial that remembers someone's thumb, and tuned it to a station that plays songs older than our arguments. He placed it on the counter. "Kitchen needs a heartbeat," he said. We toasted with tea because Grandma would have scolded wine near wet paint. The Tuesday song looped in my head like a promise. 2 mornings later, a certified letter came addressed to me in a font that thinks commas are aggressive. It was from a law office with the kind of name that's 3 last names and a hyphen. Demand to cease interference with lawful sale. Notice of intent to seek partition and damages. It alleged that I was improperly encumbering a sale and harboring an unauthorized occupant, that I owed Liam and Nora compensation for delay, and that they would seek court intervention. And I stared at it until my eyes produced static. I walked to the garden, sat on the step with the secret stare beneath, and let anger pick up my bones one at a time. Nora called before I could. "He went to Uncle Phil," she said, meaning our mother's brother, whose hobby is letters that think they are crowbars. I did not consent to that letter. I am livid. Liam is spiraling, and I took a photo and texted it to Ms. Crane and Mr. Hill. Ms. Crane responded first. "Not your uncle's letterhead, but his friend's. It's bluster. Your position is strong. You have title, a signed occupancy agreement, and a memorandum ready to record. Also, retaliation claims could boomerang." Mr. Hill replied, "Breathe. We will record today. I'll send a response reminding them of partition's inapplicability." And I breathed. The house breathed back. Paul made toast, which is not a legal remedy, but does help mouth and hands remember warmth. By lunchtime, we had a stamped receipt from the county clerk. Memorandum recorded. Diaz. No, wrong story. Different city man. Mr. Hill had emailed the blowhard firm, the occupancy agreement, redacted, and a paragraph that could be summarized as, "No." Liam texted at dusk. "I didn't authorize that letter. Uncle Phil thinks in courtrooms. I think in diapers and 529 plans. I need security. I'm trying." And I typed and deleted 3 replies. I settled on, "I know. I'm not your enemy." Then, "Come for dinner? Soup, red kitchen." He didn't respond. He came anyway. We ate lentils, were leaning in, and halfway through, he put his hands flat on the table. "I am afraid," he said, voice low, "of doing wrong by Dad's memory, by Mom's idea of fairness, by myself. Selling feels like a decision. Waiting feels like failing. Waiting feels like care," I said. "For Paul. For Grandma's wish, for this house that held all of us when we were soup." He looked around the kitchen, red, unapologetic. He nodded once, like a man making friends with a color. "Okay," he said, "let's try it your way." He helped wash dishes. Paul handed him a dish towel like a treaty. Liam took it like a man who could become a different man if the sink stayed warm long enough. The next days were lists. Paul and I installed a keyed lock on the basement. Tools, plus old wiring equals temptations. We bought a new first aid kit, put flashlights where you can actually find them, and replaced the gas line to the stove with a braided steel one that looks like a snake that went to finishing school. We wrote a house manual, not laminated. Emergency contacts, breaker map, what to do if the radiator hisses like a gossiping snake, how to open the stubborn window without swearing at it. We failed that one. And I found another envelope. This house is a treasure chest that thinks it's shy, tucked behind the piano fallboard. Inside, a music sheet of the Tuesday song, with pencil notes. Slow here, breathe. Mira, take left hand. I showed Paul. He nodded to a margin where Evelyn had written in tiny script. Promise kept. And at night, Paul told me about Arthur, how he laughed like he'd invented it, how he was terrible at wiring and excellent at pancakes, how grief had turned Paul into a lighthouse keeper without a light until Evelyn handed him a ladder and said, "Up you go." He told me about 2001 in a way that didn't make my bones hurt. Clinics, white coats, paperwork that demanded signatures for decisions that did not feel like choices. He told me about 2003 when the lungs learned to fight again, and the piano came back in slow scales. And in return, I told him about being 9 and believing hospitals were a kind of library where the books kept asking you to learn patience. About 2004, when the word remission slipped and broke on the kitchen floor. About Grandma teaching me to steep tea so that the leaves had a purpose, even when the water made them surrender shape. NWE didn't fix anything with those stories. We understood where the screws go. I held the cashier's check for $12,000 in my hand for 3 days before I could name it without flinching. 2009. Bearer. Grandma's handwriting in the passbook margins. Little notations like, set aside for his winter if mine ends, and if I go first, make quiet easier. I asked Mr. Hill what to do. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose the way he does when a sentence wants to earn a pension. Legally, he said, it's yours, found on your premises, attached to the bequest. Morally, it was aimed. Evelyn would not bind you. She would ask you to choose. And I brought the tin to Paul. He refused to touch it at first, like it was a lit candle in a paper bag. She had little, he said. She should not have saved this for me. She had enough, I said. She had you. We agreed. Half would go to Paul to create a small emergency fund so the garret would never become a trap. The other half would go to the house, wiring, gutters, the back steps that have been waiting for someone to save them from their tilt. I told Liam and Nora because secrets rot. Liam blinked like he'd bit a lemon, then nodded. Nora said, Grandma would call this right. NWE went to the bank together, Paul and I, like relatives in a festive heist. The teller treated the 2009 check like a historical artifact. It cleared slower than soup, but it cleared. Paul held his half like a man holding a weather forecast that finally promises sun. I will not use it on lamps, he said. I will use it on life. 3 nights later, the power went out on the block. A windstorm shoved the trees around like a rude choreographer, and the house sighed in harmonies. Candles found us because we had put them where we said we would. The CO alarm stayed quiet. The smoke detectors blinked like a calm pulse. And in the dark, Paul played the Tuesday song on the piano, slow, bare, like the bones of a bird that still remembers flight. The neighborhood, lit by clouds and the occasional phone flashlight, felt like 1978. Mrs. Carr, from 2 doors down, knocked to ask if we had a spare flashlight battery. We did. She asked if this was still Evelyn's house. I said yes and no. The way a new book is still a story. When the lights came back, we cheered like we'd invented electricity. Paul went to the basement and flipped the main breaker back to on, like a conductor dropping a baton. The refrigerator grumbled back into being. The red kitchen winked, and on the counter, the radio crackled. A voice said tomorrow would be clear. We slept. The next morning, Someone knocked with authority that made the front door feel underdressed. Miss Crane again, but without the briefcase. Just a folder and a face that had turned down the knives. I was nearby, she lied. Good lawyers don't believe in nearby. I wanted to say, you handled that letter well. Also. She looked at Paul. I brought this. NSHE handed me a one-page form, Affidavit of Occupancy. A simple statement that Paul occupies the garret, not as a tenant, under license, with duties, signed by me. If anyone tries to refinance or file something weird, she said, this lives with the title company now. It's a speed bump for nonsense. And I signed. Paul signed. Miss Crane smiled in a way that read as human. Paint looks good, she said. Red kitchens save marriages. She left. Nora texted a photo of Liam pushing a stroller with a baby who had declared cereal a philosophy. Caption, he's okay. I heart reacted. She replied, we're okay. And I made tea. Paul hummed Tuesday because it was Thursday and the house likes a schedule. We went outside. The dandelions were cocky. We humbled them with a fork. Do you ever plan to leave? I asked. Not as a deadline, but as a description of time. Someday, he said. When the garret stops sounding like a ship in a safe harbor and starts sounding like walls. Or when my hands decide the wires look like snakes again. Or when you need me to go because your life needs different rooms. What if none of that happens? Then I'll die here, he said. Not morbid, simply geographic. And you'll plant daisies where my knees gave up. We did. We worked out where the rain barrel should go. We made a list for the handyman that had fewer items than last week because the house had remembered how to cooperate. We ate peaches over the sink, juice on wrists, the old-fashioned way to commit to optimism. At dusk, I took the secret stair photo and taped it inside the pantry door with a note. Some things should creak. I put the tin back on the lowest shelf, now empty but not. I labeled it, Quiet Fund, Used. I closed the pantry. NT. The house dimmed itself, the way houses do when they've decided night is kind, and the red kitchen glowed like a heart at rest. A week of normal days passed, which in this house means exactly 3 odd things and several cups of tea. Then Uncle Phil, not my favorite person, not this story's villain either, just a man who believes legal stationery grants sainthood, arrived unannounced with a folder and a look like a marching band of eyebrows. He didn't say hello. He said, you can't record encumbrances without all interested parties. And I said, I own the house. NHE said, you're young. You're being handled by a squatter. Paul, who had been returning a ladder to the porch, stepped back like he'd found a rattlesnake in a shoe. He said nothing. I said plenty. And I led Uncle Phil to the kitchen table. I slid over the occupancy agreement, Mr. Hill's witness statement, the memorandum recording receipt, and the future interest proposal that Nora and Liam had tentatively agreed to in principle. I also slid over a printout of the retaliation statute Miss Crane had bookmarked. I said, we're choosing care. Here is what we're signing. He skimmed lips, primed for thunder, found very little weather, and settled on a drizzle. You'll regret locking value in an attic. Value isn't only measured in appraisal comps, I said. Sometimes value is knowing who hums the Tuesday song at night. He snorted, but for the first time he looked at Paul as a person in the room, not a clause in the way. And you, he said, you intend to live here forever? And Paul smiled, a careful thing. No one gets forever. I intend to live here well. And Uncle Phil closed his folder, muttered something about sentiment bleeding cash, and left. On his way out, he knocked the front step with his heel and frowned. This porch is a hazard. We know, I said. It's on the list. It was number 3, under gutter and wiring. That night, Nora texted, he'll cool down. He respects paper eventually. Liam added, he doesn't represent me. I'm in. The words loosened a knot I hadn't wanted to admit was there. 2 mornings later, the city's building inspector, not Diaz, different department, same clipboard energy, came because someone, bless you, universe, or Uncle Phil, had submitted a photo of our porch with the caption, "Trip risk, failing stringer." NTHE inspector, Ms. Alvarez, wore steel-toe boots and a ponytail that had seen 1,000. She tapped the middle step. It thunked like a hollow tooth. She measured the tread. It was shy by half an inch. She peered at the stringer, shook her head, and wrote a notice. Repair within 30 days. Block access if load-bearing compromised. Can we keep using it until then? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not if you like ankles, she said. Use the back door until it's repaired. I'm not here to be mean. I'm here to keep people from falling on their faces. Paul nodded. We'll prop a temporary brace and mark it off until we can rebuild. She approved a quick brace with caution tape and recommended a carpenter she trusted. Ms. Alvarez stepped inside to sign her form and paused at the piano. Is that a Wurlitzer? She asked, eyes lighting up. My grandmother had one. She played one song every Tuesday, and I looked at Paul, then at her. What song? She hummed the first 5 notes. Paul picked up the rest from the hall without meaning to. Ms. Alvarez smiled at the air like a memory had come home and signed the notice with a flourish. Fix the porch, she said. Keep the song. We blocked the front steps with bright tape. And a note. Porch in surgery. Use back door. We called the carpenter, Stefan, who showed up within 3 days with lumber that smelled like plans. He lifted the old treads like a dentist lifting regret and replaced the stringer, treads, and handrail with wood that didn't wobble when you thought mean thoughts at it. The new steps creaked correctly. Some things should creak. 3 days later, Paul didn't come down for tea. That wouldn't normally be alarming, but the house knows when a Tuesday song is missing. At 10:15 in the morning, I called up the stairs. No answer. I tapped the garret door. Still nothing. And I used my key. We added it to the house manual. If no response and door locked during daytime hours, knock, call, then enter. Paul lay on the mattress, flat, eyes open, breathing shallow. My stomach hit the floor before I did. Paul? He blinked. I'm dizzy. And I did a mini neurocheck, like a person whose mother spent years being evaluated in percentages. Face symmetrical, speech intact, grip strong, pulse a little fast, skin clammy. I ran downstairs, grabbed juice and saltines, came back. He took a sip, winced, whispered, might be my sugar. NWE sat on the floor together. 10 minutes later, the world steadied. He apologized like he'd spilled sauce, which made me want to scold him and the universe at the same time. You need a doctor, I said, not unkind. He made a face. I prefer electricians. Humor noted. Appointment anyway. Nora drove us to the clinic because she believes in specialists and steering wheels. The NP, Lena, was thorough. Blood work, EKG, the ritual of questions. It wasn't a stroke. It wasn't the heart. It was, most likely, a sugar dip, exacerbated by forgetting breakfast and overexerting in the garden under a sun that thinks it's auditioning for summer. Lena raised an eyebrow at Paul. Hydrate, eat, don't be a hero in August. And on the way home, we stopped for groceries. I stocked the pantry with protein shakes, nuts, fruit, granola bars. Wrote, eat this first, on a bin with a marker. Paul rolled his eyes, but took a shake. He put his hand on the fridge and said, softly, I forgot I don't have to do everything alone anymore. That night, the Tuesday song sounded like gratitude finding a key. A few days later, we met in the red kitchen with Mr. Hill and Miss Crane to sign the future interest paper. Our family's truce, written in full sentences. The document was simple. Knower me, retains full title and possession. An occupancy agreement with Paul, acknowledged. And upon termination of occupancy, by choice or death, if owner sells within 5 years, owner will share 15% of net. Liam looked like a man who had chosen a lane after driving with his blinker on for a mile. Nora squeezed my hand under the table in Morse code for OK. Mr. Hill stamped the notary seal and said, Evelyn would be satisfied, which is how polite people say thrilled without crying. Afterward, Liam stayed to help Stefan carry scrap wood from the porch. He asked how to tell the difference between a 2x8 and a 2x10 by sight, and nodded like he was adding it to a spreadsheet titled Life Skills I Thought Were Obvious but Weren't. He apologized to Paul for treating you like a problem when you're a person. Paul said, "We all treated grief like math at some point. No one gets extra credit for speed." We ate popsicles on the new steps that creaked like they understood we needed proof. 2 Saturdays later, a woman in her 70s with a canvas tote knocked on the back door, porch still creaking correctly. "I'm May," she said, shy smile. "My sister Lydia lived across the lane from Evelyn for 40 years. This house fed me tomatoes that made me rude to other tomatoes forever." "Come in," I said, because some names unlock doors. She brought a photo album, loose plastic sleeves, corners lifting like tired birds. Inside, Grandma at block parties, my mother with braids, Paul in 1999 on a ladder with Arthur holding the bass. They were laughing. Arthur looked like the man in the tin photo but more lit from within. On the back, "Roof Day, hot, good lemonade." May said, "After Arthur died, Paul came for dinner every Thursday for a while. Then one day he said he had a place to read. Lydia said, 'He's got company over there. Leave him to his book and that woman's soup.' And I asked if I could scan the photos. She said yes on one condition. You keep Tuesday. I could hear the piano from our porch." When it stopped, the week didn't know where to end. We framed a porch photo of Arthur and Grandma and hung it in the hallway where the secret stair creaks. Below it, a little label, "Roof Day, 1999. Paul stood in front of it for a long time, not quite touching the frame. "I thought grief ate that day," he said. "Nice to see it had leftovers." Uncle Phil sent one more letter, shorter, less teeth. Acknowledged. I remain available to advise. Which is family for, I'll be watching with binoculars, but I brought a picnic blanket instead of a rifle. NMs. Crane closed her file with a comment that made me like her on purpose. I don't get many cases where the solution is paint it red and write it down. Mr. Hill left us a folder labeled House Bible with tabs, deeds, occupancy, future interest, permits, receipts, notes. He added a sticky, "Some things should creak." And Stefan sent the final invoice for the porch. We filed it under capital improvements with a satisfaction that felt like paying a bill and planting a tree at the same time. We also scheduled the wiring overhaul, Phase 1, which Paul insisted on supervising with a chair and a book so he wouldn't be tempted to just help and end up on a ladder Lena would scold us for. And all stories like this want a ribbon. This one gets dirt. NWE took the dandelion patch, the one Grandma and Paul had humiliated for years, and cleared a square with the seriousness of a ceremony. The soil smelled like rain and compost, and all the arguments we had turned into agreements. NWE planted daisies for Paul's answer about someday. We planted peonies for stubborn beauty and pansies because one had been pressed into the ledger by someone who wrote blood work next to it, and still chose to believe in flowers. We planted thyme because the pun was too good to pass up, and because kitchens need herbs even when they prefer stories. NWE placed a small, flat stone at the front with a hand-carved line. Kindness traded for kindness. Nora did the carving with a borrowed Dremel and a jaw set like she was discouraging tears. She failed, which is how the stone got a second line. Some things should creak. Liam brought his son, who is mostly eyes and soft fists. He held out a fistful of dirt like an offering to the sun. We clapped, like he'd invented agriculture. Paul showed him how to pat the soil, gentle, like you don't need to win to grow. We stood back. The red kitchen glowed through the window, like a heartbeat you can see from the yard. The porch creaked correctly when we stepped back up. The piano waited for Tuesday. The house manual sat on the counter under a magnet shaped like a tomato. The radio was tuned to the station that knows old songs. And Paul took my hand, the way a relative does at the end of a long day. "You did it," he said. We did it, I said. He nodded toward the garret. She would be pleased. She is, I said, and it didn't feel like pretending. That evening, as the sun turned our kitchen into a red lantern, I opened Grandma's recipe box and found a card behind "Things That Do Not Go" in Jell-O. On it, in her spiky script, "What stays? The song, the soup, the people who sing and stir." We kept those. The rest, we wrote down, we filed, we fixed. And we planted.